And really, just to give you a better understanding, here we are not actually focusing on why you should embrace sustainability, because I think this is kind of, now we are past this point since the late 80s, 90s. And we almost, like, let's say at that time, we were trying to answering why companies or firms should integrate or look at sustainability. We're definitely beyond that. And since 2000, the main focus is actually on how to do it, how to go about it, and some practical ideas or some practical ways to go about sustainability. So this is really our focus onto the how rather than the why, okay? And just before we start, so I would like just to have a really quick run. And this question is really looking at your firm level. So at the moment, let's say if you are not working, maybe you can reflect in a past company or a firm that you have worked with. Just before we actually go into the what a green business model and the definition and the visual tool. So what I would like is to share with you the kind of like the global picture when it comes to sustainability in general. And this is something I would highly recommend if you are someone really interested on sustainability from the global level, to look at the this kind of like joint work with the MIT and the Boston Consulting Group. They have done a global study actually on corporate sustainability, and it was expanded over 8 years to complete the study in a way. And what they have done over those 8 years, I think this study has concluded maybe 2 years ago, 1 year ago, something like that. And they concluded, or they came up with 8 lessons that they think, based on the research they have done and based on the data they have collected from literally kind of like a very big global survey. And they came up with 8 lessons or 8 things that as corporate, or let's say as companies and firms, that they need to take into consideration when thinking about sustainability. And one of the lessons, which is lesson number 4, it's about like innovate on multiple dimensions of your business model. So what we have been doing over the last, I would say, 5 years, we have been working with construction. Let's say, again, I say it very loosely when I say construction, but it means more kind of like a built environment, architecture, engineers, and sometimes clients as well. And when we actually ask them, okay, what type of business model that you are operate on, they don't have an understanding of what a business model is, okay? And I think that's kind of like a main problem, because let's say if someone told you, okay, if you innovate on multiple dimensions of your business model, and then if you don't have that understanding of what a business model means in terms of your own firm or your own company, so how you would be able to innovate, okay? And this is where literally where we come from. We're focusing on that kind of like awareness and education and learning and having an understanding of business models. So when it comes to really understanding green business model, this is the kind of like the working definition that we are working with. We consider a business model to be green when a business changes, let's say, one element or elements of its business model to create and capture a business opportunity or a proposition for a target group, okay? So the main thing is when we talk about a green business model, you are talking about actually coupling the environmental improvement with economic benefits. So you are not just looking at doing something that to improve the environment, but also you are thinking about the economic benefits that coming out from, let's say, this improvement. And this is where, when we talk about sustainability as opportunity, we talk about it from that, let's say, perspective, on looking at it as something really that you would like to build your profile around it and have the credibility to do that. And when it comes to why should really, or what are the, let's say, the benefits for me as a firm or as a company working within our context, what would be the benefit for me? So this is really the kind of like really big, broad benefits. And within them, you can actually, let's say, make like little list and you can go on and on it. But one of the, let's say, one of the biggest category about it, it's having that credibility and that repetition and that profile around doing those kind of, let's say, projects or those kind of service and products that will have environmental improvement, but at the same time will have got economic benefits. And then we talk about the financial, especially if you're looking at the ownership. Let's say if if we talk about a building, for example, and if you have a client who have got an ownership over that building, then most of the time you will be focusing around the running cost and how, let's say, the improvement that would really help on the running cost of it. And when we look at the long-term viability, we talk about the long-term viability of, let's say, our sector or our discipline or our industry. And why we talk about long-term viability, because, for example, if we go now to the very recent, let's say, which has been established in 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals. So those now are, let's say, global goals, are kind of like human problems that we are let's say, hopefully working together and partner together to help to solve them. And when there are problems, so there are opportunities, because if you can provide a solution to those problems, then this is almost, you are kind of like creating or taking advantage of an opportunity, okay? So this is really the kind of, let's say, the biggest category when it comes to the benefit and why you should think about it or why you should integrate those within your business model. Okay, I think because of the time, I will skip this maybe, but again, I could later on post the Padlet one, and you could actually give me more answers. But it might be just something that you would think about it. In terms of, let's say, again, at a firm or a company level, how you identify sustainable opportunities. And this question is really important, because what happens is, especially in, let's say, in our context, we are very much client driven. And most of the time we will be driven by what the client wants, okay, and need, and their budget. And as you shared actually at the beginning, some of you talked about the client budget and the client and so on and so forth. And that's quite, let's say, predictable and known within our industry. But again, at the same time, during what we have been doing when we engaging with, like, let's say, some of the very proactive companies, what they do actually, they would point their clients to maybe, have you considered X and Y and Z? Have you thought about integrating such and such? Maybe, yes, it will increase the cost a little bit, but let's look at it from a long term. And when it comes to sustainability, we definitely need to have that long-term view. It's very difficult if you think about it as something really on the short term, or because again, yeah, there is a little bit of cost increase. But if you look at it from, let's say, that long-term and that, yes, long-term view, then you would be having, let's say, more chances and more opportunities to be able to even convince your clients, especially if your client would maintain an ownership of that, let's say, building or that infrastructure or that project that you are doing. Because again, if they are maintaining the full ownership of it after you complete the project for them, then they would definitely think about the running cost itself. So I would say when your client have got an ownership of the project or the building or the infrastructure, then the conversation is much easier compared to someone who, like, for example, a commercial developer who would develop something and then move on quickly to build the next thing. So always, I would say, as an opportunity, think about the ownership, okay? Because that would definitely help on moving things forward. So now we're coming to the kind of like the part of the green business model or a visual tool. So I call it a visual tool because actually when we do it in, let's say, before COVID-19 time, when we're doing it, usually we have an A1 sheet of those different elements, and then the participants will use post-it notes, and then they would try to actually think and model, let's say, their own business model. But here, hopefully, we try our best to kind of make it as visual as possible. Okay. So when we talk about green business models, okay, or even if you just talk about, let's say, because someone might say, okay, we are in just a normal business model, we are in a traditional business model at the moment, we're still not there, okay. So there are two kind of like value perspective that you will look at it. The first one, which is really sometimes or most of the time is really easy for the firms or the companies, which we call it the value creation. This is almost like, okay, how you would create that value which will give you, let's say, which will give an environmental improvement and at the same time economic benefits as well. When it comes to the value creation, this is something as a company or as a firm, this is what you do. So, and it has the key activities and key resources, okay? I'll give you definition, and also in the handout there are definition for them just to give you an understanding. But key activities is almost like, let's say, the core activities that you conduct within your business or within your firm. And sometimes those activities can be actually, let's say, most of them may be done in-house or within the organization that you are based on. And sometimes you might need to outsource, and this is where your, let's say, supply chain or support firms and companies would come there. But again, it's all about what you do, okay? What are the things that you deliver maybe? And then key resources very much linked to the key activities. Okay, what type of, let's say, physical resources you need? What type of, let's say, the intangible resources, such as maybe knowledge that you have or you need to be able to deliver or to create, let's say, that value. So that kind of, again, come with the key resources. Also, it can include your partners, let's say, or your collaborator. Because of course, if you are a little bit, let's say, depending on the size, but you might not be able to deliver everything by yourself as a firm, and you always need inputs, let's say, from others. So that what it tells us, or it gives us the value creation. This is what you are trying to create, let's say, for your clients. And then the, let's say, the second perspective, which is the value capture. And value capture is mainly about what you are getting out of what you are doing or what you are creating. And this, it includes the value proposition, which is almost like, let's say, the offer, the things that you are, the service, the product, or product or a service that you are trying to offer for a target group. Okay. So there is a very interesting point here. When we talk about the value proposition and the target group, they are really linked very much together. It's very difficult for you as, let's say, as a firm to say, okay, I'm offering X and Y and Z without thinking about who would benefit from it or who would be the target client for it, okay? So that's really the kind of, let's say, hopefully linked together in a way. And then finally, you have got the financial logic, which is, of course, if you are creating something, if you are delivering something, then there is kind of like financial assessment involved. You would have, let's say, the activities that you need to kind of like cost in, the resources that you have, maybe inside or outside, you need to cost that, how you would deliver or how you communicate with, let's say, with your clients. So all those financial assessment or financial needs within the organization need to be taken into consideration, okay? So this is really the kind of, let's say, when we look at, if we, let's say, if we have a product or a service that we would like to see and assess and to see if we can get some economic benefits while at the same time looking at those environmental improvement, then we could use, let's say, those elements as our starting point, as almost, let's say, a high level investigation, looking at our own firm's business model, and then we can see where are the gaps, we can see where are the challenges, okay? For example, when I was engaging with an architectural firm, and they are really, they have got architecture and planning, and I think something else, so they were like 3 divisions. And when we talked about, okay, what are the challenges, for example, they face when a client come and request, or they are actually willing to do a project that have got, let's say, those sustainability orientation within them. And the company told me most of the time, the challenge is actually on how we would deliver that. So we would have a consultant to come to us as an outsourcing for that particular project, to be able to build, let's say, to do, because for them, for that particular company, they didn't have the capacity in-house, but at the same time, they were having, let's say, some collaboration with external consultants who would come and look at the problem or the client needs and where they can bring their expertise and how they can deliver to that, let's say, client what they need to do. So it's always actually beneficial when you think about each of those elements in terms of your own firm or your own company. Think about not just let's say, looking at what you have, but also think about the challenges that might be associated with each one of those elements, because this is, again, it will give you really a clear idea about where resources maybe are lacking, where you need to do, or what else that you kind of like need to include to be able to fulfill or to be able to let's say, create that specific value. Okay. So the next slide is really just elaborating on those elements and give you the kind of the definition of each one of it. Okay. So if we talk about the value proposition, this is what describes, let's say, the product or service that you are offering to the client. And always, as I said, the value proposition and the target group, they come together because it's very difficult to create an offer without the client in mind. Is really difficult, because how you would fulfill the client requirements. And this is what we talk about, the target group here. Then key activities refer to the most important activities which need to be performed to create the value to the clients. What I did is actually within your, let's say, chat, there is a handout about those elements and the definition of them, which is in the next slide as well. So that could be like literally just within your hand to be able to actually look at it and see how you would model, let's say, or think about a product or a service and use the elements to describe them. Okay. So now hopefully we'll do a little exercise just before you actually using, let's say, your own product or service within something that you are really familiar with. So what I would like to do is have a scenario, hopefully very simple, and at this stage just to give you an understanding of each of those elements. So let's say we have firm A, which is a green consulting firm that works with built environment companies to achieve their green goals. Okay, so what I would like you to just spend maybe, let's say, 5 minutes, look at this firm just from this scenario and look at the 5 different elements. And if you can try to, let's say, I wouldn't say analyze, but just look at it from, let's say, that perspective. Can you, for example, identify for this firm what the value proposition is, who are the target group, what the key activities that they do, what key resources that they need to be able to deliver, let's say, this service or this green consulting, and what would be the financial logic? What are the things that really they need to take into consideration to think about it? Okay, so if we can just spend 5 minutes looking at that, and then after that we'll move on to kind of use something from your own, let's say, firm or company. Okay, and it would be interesting just to see, you can post actually on the chat, or you can unmute yourself and maybe talk about one element or two. I think that would be more, let's say, interactive and interesting. Okay.
So just to go through it again, you're saying that so A is a company, which is a green consulting firm. And
yes.
So just to repeat what you're saying, we have to go through it and...
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, so look at the scenario and then look at the 5 business model elements and see if you are able to actually look at, from just this scenario, what would be the value proposition, who would be the target group for this company, and what type of activities this company is doing, what type of resources that they need actually to be able to deliver, let's say, their value to their clients, and what would be the financial logic, what would be the main thing that they would like to cost and look for.
So I assume for the target group, it will be like the main construction companies, stuff like that.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, it will be the built environment, let's say the firms. Yeah. Okay.
So value proposition, is that more like trying to analyze how they're working, like trying to reduce the amount of damage to the environment, essentially?
Yes.
So
yeah.
Materials and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm
right.
still thinking of myself.
That's fine. Yeah, it's always interesting to kind of just have a go on. And as I said, this is very high level kind of looking in a way. Of course, when you work within your company, let's say, or within a firm, you would go in much deeper details because you would have everything in hand and you do it as, let's say, as a team rather than an individual. Okay, so it's always it's always just good to have a go with it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So here I'll just, so here I'm trying just to put a table for it, okay? If we talk about the green consulting models, so the value proposition would be the green solutions in relation to the organization or individual needs, because essentially what they do is they go to those, let's say, individual or organizations within our industry, and they look at what they actually need, and after that they provide some solutions to them, or maybe they said, maybe you need to certify X and Y and Z, maybe you need to get this expertise, and so on and so forth. And the target group would be, let's say, again, the organization or individuals who are looking to implement their strategies or goals in relation to environmental issues. So sometimes it might be the company just want to actually understand their own environmental footprint. Maybe they are not still at that point where they provide something to clients, but they want to look at their own, let's say, how kind of like they operate, what they can do to improve, let's say, their environmental performance. And the key activities for a green consulting firm, they would provide expertise. So usually they don't have, let's say, a product or a service for you, but they mainly look at the expertise, the ideas, or the performance, the environmental performance. What would be type of certification maybe you would use? What type of client that you would start to think about interacting with? Okay. And for a consulting company, the most important key resource is actually the knowledge, because literally that's what they do. They try to understand what's happening. They try to understand the policies, what's around you, and then they try to make that as practical as possible for a firm or for individual to be able to look at those solutions. And when it comes to the financial logic, so what they need to do, they need to kind of look at the cost in relation to the knowledge acquisition. Of course, they would have, let's say, maybe qualifications or certifications that they need to have before offering the service to other companies. And then most of the time, how they would make revenue, it's based on, let's say, the multiple service, or they might go not just for one company or two. Let's say the knowledge or the qualification is one, but after that, the service that they provide, it's multiple, let's say, service. So this is just an example of what an analysis would look like from a very, let's say, high level perspective rather than going into details. And this is leave me really to the last part of the of this session of actually now. So the green one is as I said, it's just a scenario to get you to start thinking and looking at it. But now what it would be interesting and really really good to do is to look at, let's say, identify a product or a service from your own firm. As I said, if you are not working currently, you can think about something that you have worked to or worked for. And then try to model, let's say, that product or service using the green business model visual tool. So this is, let's say, your scenario. And then you can start to think about something and look at it from what the value proposition would be, who are the target group, what are the key activities actually we were doing in our firm to be able to deliver that value, what are the key resources, main key resources that were needed, and then think about what the financial assessment or what are the main things that you need to take into consideration in terms of cost and revenues, okay? Just very, again, very high level application of it. So I'll give you maybe, shall we say, 5 minutes for it? And then we can have a try, or if you want to share something, it doesn't have to be in details, but just share with us like some of the thoughts, maybe something that is unique to your firm that you would like to share with us. Really good question. So we have one of the guests is saying, could you give an example of a product or service to apply the green model for students? Okay. So one of the very classical example we usually use is the, we can say the renewable energy, okay? So it could be maybe the solar energy, that could be an example, okay? It's a product that is considered having an environmental improvement, and at the same time, it actually gives economic benefits for the companies that they do it. So the solar Solar energy could be an example, okay, for a student. If anyone need any clarification, you can either type on the chat or just unmute yourself.
Sorry, on number 5, financial logic.
Yes.
What does SBM stand for?
Let me just... For the financial logic.
Yes.
Yes, what you saying?
So there is describe the financial assessment of all the means employed in the SBM. What's SBM?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. It's the sustainable business model.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Would you say look at the person's experience of the building? So more open spaces, things like that, more landscaping, that as a tool or not?
It could be actually. So as long as you're offering, let's say, something, as you're offering either a product or a service to a client, okay, or addressing their needs. So that could be considered, let's say, this is your offering in a way. Let's say that more green space or more landscape integrated. Yeah, that could definitely be an offering.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone would like to share something? You don't have to go through every part of it, but at least maybe just one or two elements of a product or a service that you have identified.
I've got one.
Yes, please go on.
So it's the value proposition. Well, so the business model is providing ground stabilization or soil improvement for ground.
Yes. Okay.
And the value proposition, I would assume, is sustainable groundworks in the form of the soil improvement. And then the target would be house builders and main contractors. Those are just a few.
Yeah.
And then the third one, key activities, would be comparison of traditional groundworks. For example, the excavation, the dig and dump activities, and import of materials compared to using Site 1 soil.
Okay, yeah.
And then key resources, I have put staff. So it's staff knowledge, some third-party approvals, because again, you need certification.
Yeah, okay.
Specialist plant and materials, and a testing lab.
Okay, yeah.
And then the fifth one is one that I was struggling with, because I guess it was viability at estimation stage. And
yes.
Tender analysis, which would be the comparison of export of excavation and import of fill compared to, again, the Site 1 soil and materials.
Absolutely, yes. So the main thing when it comes to the financial logic is actually you do it at the very end. Because why you do it at the very end? Because as you now kind of like put actually the actual, let's say, key activities and key resources. So the more details you put there, all you need to do is most of the time you'll just reflect again on those key activities and key resources, and then you would see how you would cost them. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess it would be a case study, wouldn't it? Because then you would have to compare it to a non-sustainable.
Absolutely, right. Absolutely. And I think especially in your case as someone who would provide something sustainable, let's say sustainable service or something, compared to a traditional business model.
Yeah.
One of the challenges for the clients is actually they need to see something. They need to see that comparison. And actually that as in kind of like in the whole industry, that one of the key missing things when you try to look at, let's say, a traditional way of doing things and a better way, because sustainability most of the time it's a better way actually of doing things.
Yeah.
And the challenge for you here is having, let's say, again, having that traditional way and the costing and everything goes into it. And sometimes you might need to add, let's say, if there is a social aspect, you can add that, although you cannot put some money into it, but you can talk about it as almost a risk in that case.
Okay, so again, I could look at health and safety, for example,
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
and the environment in terms of lorry movements.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's not, it doesn't always have to be financial when you're looking at the logic.
No, at all. No, because it's very difficult to put money into everything. So sometimes it's really important to kind of, and especially let's say if we look at a UK context, most of the time, if we do a little bit of having that extra mile or doing something a little bit more better compared to a traditional way, there is kind of like a tax breaks. There's some financial incentive when it comes to legal aspects of it. So it might be actually a way of looking at long term, or let's say from a legal perspective, you are lowering the costs in here, although it might not be very clear. But I think as a provider, you definitely need to take all those into consideration to be able to have that, let's say, the bigger picture, that convincing of your clients to be able to take on, let's say, this service compared to a traditional service.
Right, okay, no, that's super cool.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else would like to share something? Because I think I just had that interruption, so I said I could stay another maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes if that would be helpful, just to make up for the time. So here I'm just really giving you, let's say, if you want to go take it away and work with something that within your company is always easier. So I put numbers because it's always easier to start with the key activities with what you do. That's really the most easiest way to start with. And after that, maybe the second element can be, let's say, the target group, because most of the time you would know your clients base, you know the problems of your clients, and then if you know your clients well and you know their issues, then you would be able to identify the value proposition. Okay. So once you have identified, let's say, those three, it's much easier for you to identify the key resources because you know what you're doing. You know your targets or your clients, you know what you are offering, okay? And then you would know what type of assets that you would need to be able to do that. Sometimes, as I said, it could be tangible or intangible assets. And then finally, most of the time, the financial logic, you do it at the very end because now you have got everything in place in one. And then you would look at the costing of, let's say, all those key activities, key resources. Maybe you need to outsource something. Maybe you have got everything in-house, which is very rare, and I bet is really rare in practice. So that would, when you leave the financial logic to the very end, you would be able to give, let's say, that clearer picture of what are the, let's say, the main service or the main products that you are offering within your organization or within your firm. Okay, so that it just gives you an order to be able to go away and maybe try to do it again for something that maybe you are working on, something that you would like to work on, but you don't have clarity about it, how you'd make a case for your own firm to be able to take, let's say, X and Y and Z. So maybe you can use that as a way to put your, let's say, thinking in one place, and after that you can go into much more details if you like, or if you just give the bigger picture, that as a starting point would be enough. Okay. So really, I'm coming to the very end of what I would like to share with you today. And here I'm just, so if you have got, let's say, any reflections, any thoughts on using this tool, and if you actually use something maybe similar within your firm that you would like to share, that would be, again, would be really welcomed. Okay. Let me just put again the Padlet link where I can collect, let's say, more information in terms of any reflections, any thoughts, because this is something, as I said, we've been working on this for the last 5 years. So always we are looking at ways to make it better, to improve it, and to see what would make, like, what would be appealing and helpful, let's say, to practices to be able to move away a little bit from the traditional business model that we are operating. I think most of our firms and companies within our industry are working on very traditional business models.
Mal, could I ask a question, please?
Yes, please. Yeah, go on.
because just to the before, because I was thinking about the solar panels, like you said, for the product.
Yes.
But thinking in terms of the business model, would you say that the financial logic is based on the key activities? Because you were talking, I think, before that it's more than financial, but would the key activities equal to the financial logic, or is there anything beyond key activities that would, we have to be included in the financial assessment?
Okay, so you definitely have to include, you start always with everything that you can cost, okay? That has to start, would be the starting point. And there are things that you cannot cost, let's say, or is not very clear cut. For example, if we look at let's say the solar panels or the solar energy in general, one of the main benefits is having, let's say, again, looking at that long-term view of it. We know that at the very beginning is really they are costly because the technology is not still there. We don't have, let's say, proper, when we try, let's say, to figure or fix it or all those kind of problems, and when it comes to maintenance and things like that. So you would start definitely with everything that you can put money into it, because that it make it more realistic, and let's say it give the client the actual cost of it. But after that, if there are, as I just mentioned, sometimes there are things that you might not be able to put as like money, but you can actually classify it as risk. And if you are working in a little bit of a bigger company or a bigger firms, they usually have, let's say, risk assessment models, and they are able to kind of like do some modeling for those of the risks. They would do some scenario planning and things like that. And they would say in 5 years, you would lose X and Y and Z, or in 5 years, maybe the regulation would be very tight, and then they will put some money into it and a way to model, let's say, that risk. So I would say start with the things that you can put money on, but also take into consideration the things that you cannot maybe put money into them, but you can classify them maybe as risk or as future opportunities to get, let's say, more clients in the future, telling, okay, maybe I'm not having the, let's say, best profit at the moment, but hopefully if I do this more and more, then I would learn, then I would build my profile on delivering this product, and then I can get, let's say, more clients in the future. Okay, so that could be another way of looking at it.
Yeah, so you have, you can, for example, amount the installation and maintenance, let's say, but you can't put a number on the changes that may have to be implemented due to the law change?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions, clarification, comments, anything before we go, I think? So if there is no any other questions or comments, I think we can bring this to the end. So thank you very much. And so you can find me on LinkedIn, which is, I think I'm trying just to get used to LinkedIn these days as one of the things that I said to myself I would learn more during this lockdown, which because I don't do that in the past. And also this is my university email. So if you have got, let's say, further questions or you got any reflection after the session, then definitely feel free to reach out. Okay.